It was a regular Saturday afternoon at the Oakwood Plaza Mall, a sprawling hub of commerce in Lexington, Kentucky. Families strolled along, kids tugged at their parents' hands, and the faint aroma of pretzels and cinnamon wafted through the air. For most, it was an ordinary day. That is, until someone extraordinary walked in. A man in a sharp black blazer and jeans stepped through the automatic doors near the food court. His face, unmistakably familiar, drew quick, curious glances. He wore sunglasses and, more notably, a bright red MAGA hat that clashed starkly against the polished air of the mall. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Is that Elon Musk?" A teenage boy standing by the fountain squinted, his phone already out to snap a picture. "It can't be," his friend muttered, though he too was already recording. "Why would he be here?" Within minutes, patrons began to cluster discreetly, their conversations punctuated by gasps and speculative murmurs. The man appeared unfazed, strolling past stores like he had all the time in the world. He even stopped to inspect a display of drones at an electronics kiosk, his expression unreadable behind the reflective lenses. Meanwhile, in the mall's central office, John Whitaker, the manager, was wrapping up a routine briefing with his staff. Known for his no-nonsense demeanor and commitment to maintaining the mall's family-friendly image, John was meticulous about enforcing the rules. One of those rules: no political displays of any kind, especially in such a public space. A knock interrupted his meeting. It was Nancy, one of the security supervisors. "John, you might want to come out here," she said, looking more animated than usual. "We've got a bit of a situation." "What kind of situation?" John asked, already rising from his chair. Nancy hesitated. "Well, Elon Musk is here, or someone who looks just like him, and he's wearing a MAGA hat." John blinked. "You're joking." "I wish I was." John sighed, grabbing his radio. "All right, let's handle this quickly." By the time John reached the main floor, a small crowd had formed. People craned their necks and whispered to one another, their phones capturing every second. The man had made his way to the bookstore, where he now thumbed through a book about artificial intelligence, ironically titled "The Future We Build." John's jaw tightened as he approached, his polished loafers clicking against the tiled floor. "Excuse me, sir," John began, keeping his tone even but firm. "Can I have a word with you?" The man turned slowly, lowering his sunglasses. His face, if it wasn't Elon Musk's, was an uncanny likeness. The crowd hushed. "Yes?" the man said, his voice calm but carrying a subtle authority. John glanced briefly at the hat. "I'm going to have to ask you to remove the hat or leave the premises. We have a strict policy about maintaining a neutral environment here." The man raised an eyebrow, as if mildly amused. "A neutral environment?" he echoed. "Yes, sir. Political attire can be polarizing, and we aim to keep this mall a space where everyone feels comfortable." The man's lips curled into a faint smile. "Interesting policy," he said, not moving an inch. "But I'm afraid I have no intention of removing the hat." The murmurs among the onlookers grew louder. A few began recording the interaction more openly. John could feel the weight of their stares, the phones capturing every word. "Sir, I'm asking you politely," John said, his voice tightening. "If you refuse to comply, I'll have to involve security." The man crossed his arms, the red hat catching the light above. "Do what you have to do," he said evenly. John's hand hovered over his radio, the tension in the air thickening by the second. John's radio crackled as he called for additional security. By now, the situation had drawn a considerable crowd. Mothers with strollers paused, teenagers leaned over railings on the second floor, and even the pretzel vendor abandoned his cart to get a closer look. It felt like everyone in the mall had their phones out, live streaming or snapping photos. Within moments, two uniformed security guards arrived. One of them, a tall, burly man named Eric, took his place beside John, arms crossed. The other, a younger guard named Mia, looked uneasy as her eyes darted between John and the man in the red hat. The man stood his ground, calm and composed. He didn't fidget or shift. He simply waited, his expression unreadable but faintly amused. "Sir," John repeated now with more authority, "this is your final warning. Remove the hat or leave the mall." The man glanced at the guards, then back at John. "And if I don't?" he asked, his voice steady, his tone almost challenging. "Then we'll have to escort you out," Eric interjected, stepping forward slightly. "Escort me out for wearing a hat?" the man said, his eyebrows raised. He chuckled lightly, shaking his head. "Do you hear yourselves?" The crowd began to murmur louder. Some voices rose above the rest. "This is ridiculous. Let him wear the hat," shouted a middle-aged man in a denim jacket. "Yeah, he's not hurting anyone," a young woman added, holding her phone high to record. But others had a different take. "This is private property. They can enforce their rules," someone countered from the back. "It's not about the hat. It's about keeping politics out of public spaces," another chimed in. The man took a slow step closer to John, his presence commanding yet non-threatening. "Tell me something, Mr. Manager," he said, his voice low enough that John had to lean in slightly to hear. "Is this really about the hat, or is it about who you think I am?" John's breath hitched for a fraction of a second. It was a sharp question, one that hit harder than he expected. He straightened, trying to maintain his composure. "This isn't personal, sir," John said, his tone clipped. "Rules are rules. Rules are rules," the man echoed softly, almost to himself. He took off his sunglasses, revealing piercing blue eyes that were startlingly familiar. The crowd collectively gasped, as though they'd been holding their breath. "Oh my God, it is him!" someone whispered loudly. "Elon Musk!" a teenage girl shrieked, her voice breaking through the din. The man smiled faintly but didn't confirm or deny it. He simply stood there, letting the moment hang in the air. John felt the sweat prickling at the back of his neck. This wasn't what he'd signed up for. He wasn't just managing a mall anymore. He was in the middle of a spectacle that was quickly spiraling out of control. "I'm asking you again," John said, his voice faltering slightly. "Will you remove the hat or leave?" The man's smile faded. He tilted his head slightly as if considering something. Then, in a tone that was calm but edged with defiance, he said, "No." Eric reached for the man's arm, but the man took a step back, his voice rising just enough to be heard clearly over the crowd. "You're going to forcibly remove me? Go ahead, let the world see." The crowd erupted. Some cheered him on, while others gasped, their phones capturing every second. A few began shouting at the security guards to back off, while others defended the mall's policy. Mia looked nervously at John. "What do we do now?" she whispered. John hesitated, weighing his options. The situation had become a public relations nightmare. No matter what he did, someone would be angry, and the incident would be plastered all over social media by nightfall. Before he could respond, the man raised a hand, signaling for silence. The crowd gradually quieted, their attention glued to him. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be," the man said, his voice calm but firm. He turned to John. "But before you make your decision, maybe you should hear why I'm here." The crowd leaned in, their curiosity piqued. Even John found himself compelled to listen, despite his growing frustration. "All right," John said after a long pause. "Let's hear it. But if this is some kind of stunt—" "You'll understand soon enough," the man interrupted, his tone carrying a quiet confidence. The man clasped his hands together and took a deliberate step forward, his voice resonating just enough to command the attention of everyone nearby. "You all think this is about a hat," he began, glancing around the crowd, making eye contact with a few onlookers. "But it's not. It never is." The murmuring stopped. Phones stayed poised, recording every word as the crowd swelled even more, spilling into the nearby corridors and stores. Some employees leaned against counters, riveted, while others stood in their shop doorways, captivated. The man turned to John, gesturing lightly. "You're just doing your job. Enforcing policies, maintaining order. I get it. But sometimes the rules we cling to do more harm than good." "Look," John interrupted, his patience thinning. "I don't know what point you're trying to make, but—" "Let me finish," the man said, raising a hand calmly but firmly. The crowd let out a collective ooh at the subtle rebuke. John bit back a retort and crossed his arms, motioning for the man to continue. The man took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the sea of faces. "Imagine this. You see someone walking down the street wearing something you disagree with. Maybe it's a hat, maybe it's a shirt, maybe it's just the way they look. You feel uncomfortable, so you decide they shouldn't be allowed in your space. You tell yourself it's about principles, about protecting others from discomfort. But really it's about fear. Fear of what they represent. Fear of what you don't understand." The words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. Some people nodded subtly. while others shifted uncomfortably. The tension was palpable. A voice from the crowd suddenly cut through the silence. But why the hat? Why here? It was a young woman in a striped sweater, her phone still aimed squarely at the man. He smiled faintly, acknowledging the question. Good question. I'll get to that. But first, he turned back to John. Tell me something, Mr. Manager. What do you think people are really afraid of when they see this hat? John hesitated, caught off guard. It's not about fear, he said, choosing his words carefully. It's about keeping this mall neutral, like I said. Politics don't belong here. The man raised an eyebrow. Neutrality, huh? Interesting concept. But neutrality isn't silence. It's action. It's letting people coexist, even when it's uncomfortable. The crowd murmured again, the volume rising. A few people clapped softly, though most were still unsure where the man was going with his point. Social media comments, it's uncomfortable. The crowd murmured again, the volume rising. A few people clapped softly, though most were still unsure where the man was going with his point. Social media comments began to flood the live streams, with opinions ranging from outrage to admiration. Nancy, the security supervisor, approached John quietly. We're trending on Twitter, she whispered, holding up her phone. The hashtag MAGA at the mall was gaining traction, with thousands of views on multiple live streams. This is getting out of hand, John muttered, rubbing his temples. I can't just let this go. The man, seemingly reading John's frustration, stepped forward again. Let me make one thing clear, he said, addressing the entire crowd. I didn't come here to make a scene. I came here for a reason. And yes, this hat is part of that reason. But it's not the reason you think. The murmurs grew louder, curiosity overtaking skepticism. Even John found himself leaning in slightly, against his better judgment. Why are you here? Someone shouted from the back. What's the big deal? The man smiled slightly, but his eyes betrayed a hint of something deeper, something heavier. I'll tell you, he said, but first let me ask you this. What would you do if everything you thought you knew about someone changed in an instant? Would you listen? Or would you shut them out because of what they were wearing? The question lingered, the weight of it pressing down on the crowd. A few people looked away, uncomfortable, while others leaned forward, eager for the answer. John opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, the man reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He held it up, his expression solemn. This, he said, unfolding it slowly, is why I'm here. The crowd surged closer, trying to catch a glimpse. Phones zoomed in, capturing every detail of the crisp document in his hands. John's stomach tightened as he squinted at the paper, trying to make out the words. What is it? Someone shouted. The man's expression softened, and his voice dropped slightly, forcing everyone to lean in. It's a letter, he said, from a young woman who works here. She wrote to me asking for help, and that's exactly why I came. The crowd erupted into whispers, their curiosity reaching a fever pitch. A letter? From someone at the mall? The idea seemed almost absurd. People exchanged confused glances while still clutching their phones, eager not to miss a second. John stepped closer, his arms crossed defensively. A letter? What does that have to do with you, or with this situation? The man unfolded the paper completely, glancing at it briefly before raising his gaze to the onlookers. His tone softened, carrying a weight of sincerity. This letter is from a young woman named Kaylee, he said. She's 21, works at the food court, and dreams of going to college one day. A gasp rippled through the crowd. In the back, a girl in a green apron, holding a tray of napkins, froze. Her face turned pale as she recognized her name. Oh no, she whispered, her hands trembling. She wrote to me, the man continued, because her mother's medical bills are crushing her family. She's been working 2 jobs just to help keep the lights on, and despite everything she's been through, she's still trying to save enough for community college. The crowd's energy shifted. The tension of confrontation gave way to something more profound. Empathy. Even John felt the knot in his stomach loosen, replaced by a flicker of unease. But what does this have to do with you? John asked, his voice quieter now. Why would she write to you? The man smiled faintly, his eyes meeting John's directly. Because she believed I could help, he said simply. He held the letter up again, gesturing toward the crowd. Kaylee didn't just send this to anyone. She sent it to me, Elon Musk. And for the record, yes, that's exactly who I am. The crowd erupted into chaos. Some people gasped audibly, while others shouted in disbelief. Phones zoomed in on his face, comparing his features to the man they'd seen on countless news programs. A teenage boy exclaimed, "I told you it was him," while another muttered, "No way, this is insane." Even John, usually unflappable, found himself reeling. He stared at the man, now undeniably Elon Musk, struggling to process what was happening. "Wait, what?" Musk chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You didn't believe me before, and I get it. This isn't exactly a typical day at the mall." He turned back to the crowd, his voice growing steadier. "Kaylee's letter moved me. She didn't ask for money, by the way. She just asked for advice. Advice on how to balance her dreams with the weight of her family's struggles. She thought maybe I could give her some guidance." Kaylee, still frozen in the back, tried to hide behind the soda machine, but the crowd had already spotted her. Several people turned toward her, pointing and whispering. Her face burned with embarrassment. "Kaylee," Musk called gently, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on her. "You don't have to hide. Come here." She hesitated, her heart pounding. Her co-workers nudged her forward, whispering encouragements. Finally, with shaking hands, she stepped into the clearing, her green apron still tied around her waist. The crowd parted to let her through. Musk smiled warmly, handing her the letter. "You were brave to write this," he said. "And you were right. I want to help." Kaylee stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. You actually read it?" she stammered. "I didn't think anyone would." "I did," Musk said firmly. "And I came here today because I wanted to meet you in person." Tears welled in her eyes as the weight of the moment hit her. "I don't understand," she said. "Why would you care about someone like me?" Musk placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice filled with conviction. "Because people like you are the reason I do what I do. You're the future, and you deserve a chance to build something amazing." The crowd broke into applause, some wiping their eyes as they watched the emotional exchange. Even John found himself clapping hesitantly, caught up in the moment despite his earlier frustration. Kaylee wiped her tears, her voice trembling. "But I don't know what to do next. I'm just trying to survive." Musk smiled, his gaze steady. "Let's start with this." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "This is for you. Consider it an investment in your future." Kaylee took the envelope with trembling hands, opening it cautiously. Inside was a check. She gasped audibly, covering her mouth as her eyes scanned the number. The crowd leaned in, eager to know what it said. Kaylee's voice cracked as she whispered, It's $50,000. The applause erupted again, louder this time. People cheered and whistled, their earlier tensions forgotten in the wake of the heartfelt gesture. The mall echoed with cheers and applause, a stark contrast to the tense standoff from moments before. Kaylee stood in stunned silence, clutching the envelope like it was a lifeline. Her co-workers rushed to her side, patting her back and offering congratulations. The crowd buzzed with energy, everyone eager to capture this once-in-a-lifetime event on their phones. John stepped forward cautiously, his professionalism warring with the humanity of the moment. "Mr. Musk," he began, his voice quieter now. I didn't know about this situation. If I had." Musk turned to him, his expression calm but firm. "You didn't know because you didn't ask," he said, his tone cutting just enough to make John flinch. "You saw a hat and made a judgment. I get it. Rules are rules. But sometimes rules need to bend for the right reasons." John nodded, shame washing over him as the weight of Musk's words settled in. "You're right," he admitted. "I was too focused on enforcing policy to see the bigger picture. I'm sorry." Musk's face softened, and he offered a small nod. "Apology accepted. Just remember, people are more than what they wear or the opinions they hold. Sometimes it's worth taking a moment to understand the person behind the appearance." The crowd murmured in agreement, a few people nodding thoughtfully. Musk turned back to Kaylee, his smile returning. "This is just the beginning," he said. "Use this opportunity to chase your dreams. And when you're in a position to help someone else, pay it forward." Kaylee wiped her tears, her voice trembling as she responded. "I will. I promise." As the crowd began to disperse, the energy shifted again. The event had been recorded, shared, and discussed in real time, making waves across social media platforms. News outlets quickly picked up the story, framing it as an unexpected act of kindness from one of the world's most recognizable figures. Back in his office, John scrolled through Twitter, his face pale as he read the comments. Most praised Musk for his gesture, and Kayleigh for her courage. But a fair share criticized John's actions, accusing him of overreach and bias. He sighed, feeling the sting of public opinion. Yet, amid the negativity, one comment stood out. Sometimes we all need to be reminded to see the humanity in each other. Lessons learned today. Let's do better. That night, Kayleigh sat at her kitchen table, the check still in her hands. Her mother, frail but smiling, reached over to squeeze her daughter's hand. "You've always been a fighter," she said. "And now you've got the chance to do something incredible." Kayleigh nodded, her determination growing. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt hope, real, tangible hope. Meanwhile, Elon Musk's departure from the mall was as understated as his entrance. He declined interviews, waved politely to fans, and slipped away without further fanfare. But his actions left a lasting impact, not just on Kayleigh, but on everyone who witnessed the day's events. The next morning, Oakwood Plaza's management issued a statement apologizing for the incident and promising to review their policies to ensure a more inclusive environment. John himself drafted the statement, vowing to approach his role with more compassion and understanding moving forward. The story became a viral sensation, sparking conversations across the country about judgment, compassion, and the power of small acts of kindness. Kayleigh's story inspired others to share their struggles, leading to a wave of support and community-driven initiatives. In the end, what began as a confrontation over a hat transformed into something far greater. A reminder of the humanity that connects us all, even in the most unexpected places.